Did you sleep last night, Jenny?
Some.
Well, if you want to go, let me know.
Probably the more
This
this week.
weekend.
I was gonna say, did you, Mary?
Not because I was working.
I was gonna say, were you worried about the budget?
She's worried about everything. This is a special meeting of the county council for the purpose of discussing the 2022 budget. This is the first of a series of meetings. I believe today's meeting is going to focus on, Jenny's going to focus on giving us some background and laying the groundwork for future decision making. So I guess we should call the roll. So please do so.
Mayor Mercer?
Here.
Councilmember Mercer?
Here.
Councilmember Davies?
Here.
Councilmember Lister?
Here.
Councilmember LaCarnation? Here. Councilmember Wilson?
Here.
Councilmember Harrison?
Here.
Councilmember Laughter?
He's up.
Councilmember Brennan?
Here.
With that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our finance director, Jimmy Lee, and our deputy director, Joe Tennant.
Well, great.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'm actually gonna jump in and do it. Just a quick introduction.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry.
No problem. So I just wanted to just read a quick intro I wrote here. Tonight's budget discussion, as you know, we focus on the general fund. We'll be going back to discuss the water fund, sewer fund, enterprise fund, in the future meeting. Department heads were asked to submit budget requests with the goal of providing the current level of service that's expected of their departments. While everyone understands the city has financial limitations, many departments are stretched thin at times, and we wanted to get a clear understanding of what the needs are. As we compare the departmental requests, contractual increases, rising insurance costs, et cetera, with anticipated revenues, it became clear, as we expected, that our work will be cut out for us this year. To reach this preliminary stage of the budget process, we have made cuts to requests. We are recommending the use of some of our restricted fund balance reserves, and we are showing the use of approximately $1.1 billion from our unrestricted fund balance. As this is a preliminary budget, our intent is not that this is the final adopted budget. We understand there will be some concerns about possibly using fund balance. And we just want to know we have already made any reasonable adjustments to get to this point, but at this point we think it's time for some council feedback, and we understand that there may be more adjustments to be made. So based on your feedback, we'll move it from this meeting. So with that brief introduction, I just want to pass along.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Mayor. Welcome, everybody. And Friday night, you should have gotten a pretty large email, a couple of them anyway, three sets of three that detailed basically the draft budget. We need to review each area and each fund in its individuality and determine what steps we want to take forward. But tonight, we want to focus on the general fund. Then also over the weekend, we got a summary just highlighting. So Friday night was for those of you who want to read details. It was a pretty detailed report, quite a few pages, but it was meant for those who want details. Some people prefer summary. Some people just want high level information. So the summary on Sunday night was for that purpose, for those of you who didn't want to read line by line. But now we're going to try to go over it in high level, but also detailed information. So in front of you, you have a packet that has the agenda for tonight on the topics. You also have a printout of what was sent on Friday night. That is for your use if you want to make notes, if you want to go through it and come back next week, with your questions and highlights. There's a lot of information. We're not looking for feedback tonight. What we're doing is just trying to present you with the information so we can make educated decisions going forward. And I would like to suggest that we kind of hold our questions till the end, if that's possible, because some of the questions may get answered through the presentation. And also, because there is so much information and we only have an hour, I just want to try to make sure that we cover it all. So the first section is the tax cap. And Back in August, on our August 3rd meeting, I presented you with information on the tax cap. And so we're just going to refresh on it. And this section of the presentation, Joe is going to take it over.
Thanks. So as Jenny indicated, we have talked about this before. Just to review a couple things, this formula is determined by New York State. It's not something that we can control or manipulate. The only thing it does is provide us with information that a decision has to be made on. The main two parts of it are the tax-based growth factor and the allowable levy growth factor. We've been over this, but again, these are provided by the state each year. So as I said, there's no ability to influence the calculation, but it does give us information. So if you think of revenues, when you look at all the revenues that we budget for, there's some that we can control, there's many that we cannot control, there's some that may be known, and there's others that may be unknown. So the tax levy is one that we can know and control, as compared to, say, the state aid, which we usually know, but we have no control over, or the sales tax, which we neither know nor have control. We just use projections and trend analysis. So the formula determines what the levy limit is, and if you want to exceed the levy limit, it requires 60% of voting power to approve. And according to the state comptrollers, what the calculation does is it establishes a limit on the annual growth of property taxes levied. So that's significant because when you're reviewing the information and you're looking at the budget, and I know there's been discussions about revenue generation and whatnot. So this is one area where the state is imposing through the formula a limit to help protect taxpayers. So when you look at it and you think about levying either to the limit, below the limit, or above the limit, it's just something to consider that the state is already providing some protection and limit on it for the taxpayers. So we shared this before. This is how the formula is calculated. We provided 2022 calculation as well as what the calculation was in 21. And not to go through in full detail, but there's a couple items that impact it. Obviously, there's the tax-based growth factor and the allowable levy growth factor. But also, if you look at the pilot's receivable, the prior year is added in. So in 2022, that's the 228,500, and then the current year is subtracted. So a little further down, that's the 202,000 parentheses. So those are things that can still impact it. And the reason I'm pointing those out is the state recognized within the formula that even though we're looking at, say, an inflation adjustment as part of the limit, right? The state also realizes that municipalities have things that impact their ability to raise taxes, right? And pilots is one of those. So the state is even acknowledging that there are times when the tax cap, where you need to be able to limit more or less, depending on how the formula works, on the constituents. So we just wanted to share that. And this is some information on the current, this is for 2022. This is just, if you look at rate increases from 1% to the cap, which is a 3.16%, by increments of 0.25%. This is just what the different amounts are, as well as what the tax rate change is estimated to be, and the increase per $100,000. So that increase per 100,000, just to clarify, if you have a $100,000 house, on the first line of 1%, your taxes would go up $9.83. If you have a $100,000 tax and you're at the full 3.16, your taxes would go up $31.04. So that's just some information for you. This is kind of like a history of the rates. So this shows the rates going back to, well, 2010, but the changes only apply from 11 on. It shows what our rates were, as well as what the amounts raised, the tax rates, and the increase per 100,000. So that just gives you some history. And if you note, in 2017, there was a reassessment, which of course changed our assessed values. And that's why you see the tax rate change. It doesn't mean that the levies were impacted in terms of what the total levies were, but the rate had an impact because our assessed values changed, and that's how we determine what individual taxes are due. In this example, in the next slide we've shared before, this just provides some information. In 2019, there was a zero increase levy amount. In 2020, it was 81,000. In 2021, we levied 95,000. That gives you some cumulative cash flow over time. And this compares oh, sorry, there's an error there, but the levy amount for 2019 should be 0. So in 2019, there was no additional levy made, even though we could have levied 155,000 in 2000. And so these are the amounts that were actually levied versus what could have been levied. And as you can see, over those years, there was $365,000 of revenue that was foregone, or $291,000 that our levy would have been higher if it was levied to the limit in each year. So that's just, I think we shared this in the August presentation as well. And this is just a final graph, which we also shared in August, but it just refreshes the difference between the what was actually levied and what the limit was. Thank you.
Any questions on that area? I know, but I just, sorry. All right, so the next area, what part of the budget process is to forecast our fund balances for the end of 2021. And what we do is we analyze each account, every revenue source, every expense code, and we look at what we think is going to come in based on the activity that we've had year to date, based on any changes, based on orders that are outstanding. So on the slide, you will see where our major revenue projections are for 2021. We're actually going to realize close to a 1.5 million excess in revenues from our adopted budget. And the reason being is because we're predicting that sales tax is going to come in 980,000 higher than we actually budgeted. We budgeted 4.12 million in sales tax. Looking at the sales tax activity, I believe it's going to be around 5.1 million for the end of the year. Even if we were to collect exactly what we did in the last section of the year, right now we've got sales tax through August. So if we collect exactly what we collected in 2020 for September through December, we will be over the 5 million mark. So I'm predicting that we'll collect about 5.1 million by year end. Also, ambulance charges. The ambulance calls are almost up to the 2019 level again. And looking at the revenues that we have through the end of September and predicting the last 3 months, I believe we're going to collect about 300,000 more than our 2021 budget. So those are the major areas. In your packet, you will see a detail of every account, but here we just have the highlighted summaries. Also, just so you know, we did, in your packet, you'll see on the last line, the sale of real property for the Beach Street lot was a one-time shot. That's why I separated it out. That was 257,500. Dave on page 5. So that column, the last column on there, are the 2021 projections. So if my estimates are close, I'm assuming that we are going to be well over $1 million by the end of the year for our revenues. In that same process, we then look at the expenditures. So if you go to page 6 of your presentation, you'll see that we're estimating that the expenses are going to be approximately 875,000 lower than what we budgeted. And a majority of this is because of personnel vacancies. And we broke it out between service area for you, and you will see that the highest savings right now is in public safety, and that is because of the vacancies in the police department. And again, in your detail, you will see that I provided to you the government general support, the public safety, transportation, culture and recreation, home and community services, provided you about 78% of the savings, and the bulk of it is with personnel vacancies. And as a quick summary there, we're estimating over 500,000 in savings between payroll expenses and fringe benefits, and all other categories about 180,000. And again, this will be good for the city as far as 2021 completion of the year end, and it will substantially save on what we had anticipated using on our fund balance. So
that's just.
Next page in your presentation, I provided you a detail of our reserves. And what this is it shows you every restricted reserve that we have. This is not on the slide itself because it was just too cumbersome to get onto the slide. But what we laid out here is we showed the January 1st balance. It's on page 7 and 8 of the presentation. So as of January 1st, we had 4.9 million in reserves. And I broke them out by the different types of reserves. I showed what our 2021 expenditures are, what we've committed, what our outstanding encumbrances are, and what we are looking for as of 12/31 as far as our restricted reserve balances. This is for your study and for your information, and I would like to start presenting this at least once a month to the Finance Committee to keep them abreast on what the reserve balances are. And I also provided on the schedule the 2022 commitments that we have in the preliminary budget. And you will see that I've also had suggestion additions because we are going to realize an increase in our unrestricted fund balance. I would like to suggest for the council to consider transferring unrestricted reserves to the reserve fund balances, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Okay. All right, so the next area, yes, that's what you wanted to get. So if you go to page 9 of your presentation, first I would like to, on the left-hand side are the restricted fund balances. That is what we just went over in detail, and it shows the 1/1/21 beginning balance. It shows the expected income coming in and what our expenditures are going to go out. And there's just a quick summary of the 3.7 million that will be left in the restricted reserves. On the right-hand side is our unrestricted fund balance. And you will see that as of 1/1, our unrestricted fund balance was about 7.5 million. With the estimated revenues and expenditures, we are going to realize an increase of just over $1 million in our unrestricted fund balance. And so that will leave a balance of approximately 8.5 million. Now, if you look at the total fund balance of as of 1/1, 12.5 estimated revenues and expenditures, we then I'm expecting to close the year out at 12.3, almost 12.4. And that will be made up of restricted of 3.7 and unrestricted of 8.5. Our preliminary budget for 2022 is a little over $17 million. Our fund balance policy is to have 35% of unrestricted fund balance of our adapted budget. So I showed you what our 35%, 40%, and 45% numbers are. And then if we want to take the difference of what those numbers are, you will see that we have a difference of 2.5 million at the 35% mark, 1.7, or just about 800,000 at the 45% mark. So this is why I would like the council to consider transferring from the unrestricted fund balance to the restricted fund balances. And what I would like to propose to you is to, one, I would like to create a parking reserve with the sale of the Deep Street lot funds. This will prepare the city for the future of a possible parking district, our parking study, our paid parking idea. Greg can give more, vision into what he's thinking about. But I would like the council to consider creating that reserve, especially with those funds, because that's a one-time shot. Those funds were received from a parking source, and we're thinking it would be a great way to maintain our parking and create our parking plan. I would like you to consider 150,000 going into the public safety reserve, 150 in the highway, 100,000 in the streets and sidewalks, and I would also like to create an IT reserve. And the reason I would like the council to consider creating an IT reserve is for two major reasons. We have to recable the public safety building. that is going to be over $100,000 in expenditures when we recable that building. The cabling in the building right now is just right on the edge of being okay for everything that's going on in the building. And for them to safely upgrade their new camera systems and their new security systems and things like that that's going to go into the building, we really do need to recable it. And we also have computer replacement schedules. When the public safety building was outfitted with all of their computer hardware, every computer was purchased in the same year. To have to replace those computers all at once will be extremely expensive. And so what we would like to do is if we have this IT reserve on hand, when those big replacement, well, first let me back up. We plan on analyzing each computer individually and then staggering them over time and replacing the ones that need it the most first. So that way we can do a 5-year, 6-year, 7-year replacement instead of having them all replaced at the same time. So those are considerations that, you know, I would like the council to consider as we get closer to December to add. Then if you do that, and you take our estimated unrestricted fund balance and reserve that $500 or $757,000, our percentage to the preliminary budget will then be just over 45%. And then if you then take out what we're going to appropriate possibly in the 2022 budget, will then be down to about 39%. And you will see that I personally don't like being at the 39% number. I like being between 40 and closer to 45%. The reason being is our fund balance has got us through many crises. It's got us through the 2006 flood. It got us through the 2011 flood. It got us through COVID. It also carries our capital projects before we bond, so we don't have to have the expense of issuing BANs. Knock on wood, we have never issued a revenue anticipation note in the city. Since my tenure, we have not issued BANs to carry capital projects because of the healthy fund balance. That saves the taxpayer a lot of money. So that's why I like it a little bit higher than the 35. So then for the major revenue sources in the 2022 preliminary budget, this is just a summary, and this is on page 10 of your presentation of the preliminary budget compared to the 2021 budget. You will see that we were able to increase revenues by $1.4 million. The majority of it is in sales tax and ambulance revenue. And even though I believe that the sales tax is going to be over $5 million for 2021, I am not comfortable suggesting that we budgeted that for 2022. I would prefer to see that number a couple years in a row to see if it's consistent or if 2021 is going to be an outlier. And also with the ambulance, even though I'm estimating more than $1 million for 2021, again, I am not comfortable presenting that as a budgeted number for 2022. Not knowing again with the payer mix and with activity for 2022, depending on what COVID does and things like that, I just don't want to over budget. So again, we were able to increase with the 1.4 million. And what this essentially does, by bringing our preliminary revenues up to the $15.6 million, we basically have funded the 2021 budget without any fund balance. So in 2021, we had appropriated $397,000 from reserves and $1 million from unreserves. But now these revenues have now funded that 1.3 or 1.4 that we used for the 2021 budget. Next, I just wanted to show you the detail of what's in the 2022 preliminary budget. Again, for the unrestricted fund balance, we chose 2 pieces of highway equipment. Fund balance, in my viewpoint, is to be used for one-time items. And and really only one-time items, not repeating operating costs. But because the reserves have been utilized quite a bit in the past 2 to 3 years, I do not want to suggest that we take any more out of the highway equipment reserve. So that's why we went to the unrestricted for those 2 pieces of equipment. And then the 971,000 is to cover the deficit that we have for this budget. Then in the general fund reserves, public safety, we have 2 police vehicles and the firefighter turnout gear. We have sidewalk repairs and replacements from the street and sidewalks reserve, the hot box trailer from the highway reserve, and the crime 12,000 for the tasers from the crime proceeds. So I just wanted to show you what the anticipated use is for the fund balance categories. Okay, the next section is on the 2020 preliminary expense budget. And this is by category of expense type. And you will see that personal services is up by 340,000, fringe benefits 270, equipment 312, and supplies and services 568. So this is an estimated increase of 1.4 or close to $1.5 million. And when we reviewed the budget, we went basically line by line, item by item, to figure out what we could postpone, what we could fund from other sources, what we could just right out eliminate. So on the next page, on page 13 of the presentation, we show where we started. So the 2022 request came in at over $20 million. And the preliminary is now at 17 million. So we already took out 3.2 million from the request. And in those categories, it was summarized between equipment, wages and fringe benefits, and like an all other category, which is materials and supplies and purchase services mainly, and training costs. So that I just wanted to show you the type of expenditures that we've already cut from the department head's requests. Included in the preliminary budget are 4 new positions. And these will be presented to you as temporary hires in anticipation of future retirements. That will be 3 firefighters and 1 police sergeant. If the council approves this approach, we will be analyzing it through staff studies, seeing if it's effective and if it's efficient, and we'll determine if it's also sustainable. So just so you know that those 4 positions are in what the document that you're looking at.
Once I just something, just a little clarification or expansion on that. When Jenny says temporary, it should be permanent full-time hires, but as she said, anticipating future retirements in the relatively near term, the next year or so. This would position us, if we decided in, say, the 2023 budget process that we don't want to permanently increase the staffing levels in these departments by those amounts. Through attrition, we can go back to right where we are now. And we will have gained having fully trained firefighters and a police sergeant ready to go when those retirements happen. Alternatively, throughout 2022, we're going to be evaluating how these positions work out, presuming they're funded, and possibly continuing on with those positions permanently. So it leaves us some flexibility to determine what the best options are. I think they're, Chris and Brian both have some good ideas as to ways to be more efficient and how to run their operations better. We're going to talk all about those throughout 2022. I think 2023 we would have a better idea of what the best path forward is. So this might be a temporary measure together.
Question.
Yes.
If these are seen as temporary, pending future retirements, should we be saying that we're creating new full-time positions? I look back to what we did in the police department this past year. We hired 7, 8 more police officers. We didn't create any new positions. All we did was the council authorized the hiring of additional officers above and beyond the number of positions in anticipation of future openings. It seems to me to be more responsible if they're deciding to take this approach and to do the same thing instead of saying we're creating 3 new full-time positions, which we may in a future year cut. That we should be saying that we're not creating new full-time positions, but you're asking the council to fund additional hires this year in anticipation of, in advance of coming retirement.
Yes,
That's what we're saying.
yes. You just said it much better than you did.
I just want to clarify, it's not creating 3 new full-time positions. What I heard Rick say is maybe in the future, there'll be a decision to create 3 new full-time positions. But not, we're asking the council to do what we do with the police department.
And one thing that we also have to keep in mind, and again, this would be part of our future considerations are the legacy costs. It's the post-employment health insurance costs that will happen if we do increase staff members. So we just have to keep that in mind. Also, I just want to.
No, you're not expecting from one thing, and you've heard me say this, Jim, so it's good, but I guess for them as a council, we only have 1 council member, Dave, who was on the council 6 years ago when I first started. And when I first started, the city had been spending reserves, unrestricted reserves every year. It was budgeted because we couldn't make ends meet in every year. And it was Dick Miller, to his credit, who said that's not sustainable. We cannot do that. We have to create a plan to cut costs so we can get to the point where we can balance the budget without spending our unrestricted reserves. And the first year, no credit to me, because I had just arrived, I was lucky. But my first budget when I was elected was the first year in I don't know how long that the city managed to pass a budget which was significantly below the tax cap. I think it was maybe 1%. And it was also did not use any unrestricted. So there was a lot of pats on the back, they will remember. People were very proud of the fact that they were able to make tough decisions, very tough decisions, to get to that point. And we've held that for the last 6 years. We've had averaging about 1% tax increase. We've had not budgeted unrestricted funds. And I just, it concerns me after I've seen where we were and how hard previous councils worked to make very hard decisions to get to where we are now, to go back to budgeting unrestricted reserves for payroll and ongoing expenses. One time things in that it's there for reserves are there for opportunities or rainy days, but not. We don't want to get back into the mess we were in more than 6 years ago. That's my speech.
Thank you, Mayor. And I agree that you do not want to make it routine where you are balancing your budget with unrestricted fund balance for operating costs. It's not sustainable. The fund balance will get eaten up very quickly. But we have a section that we're going to talk about that with. One area that I didn't point out when we were talking about the reductions from the request to the preliminary, originally, when we received our health insurance rate renewals, and Katie, please correct me if I state it wrong, but I believe our first quote from the insurance companies was 21% increase. Then our brokers went back and then got it down to 18.55% increase. That was what we used for our request column. And then our brokers went back again and got it down to, I want to say,
7.1.
I didn't know if there was, did it go from 18 down to 7, or is there an interim in there?
There were other concessions on the other plans,
Okay.
which contributed to the 7.1%.
So we're currently at 7.1% increase. And this is a perfect example of when I talk to you about percentage increases versus flat dollar increases. When you take a 7.1% increase on a $4 million bill, that's a pretty big number. You know, so one of the definite savings between the request and the tentative or the preliminary budget was because we were able to get that health insurance rate increase down from 18.55% down to 7.1. We also had anticipated that our 65 plus plan would have a 10% increase, and that came down to no, just under 5%, I believe it was 5.1%, something like that. So again, that was a significant savings for us, not a savings from previous year, but a savings in our request. So I just wanted to point that out. Also, to talk about the expenditures, Joe built some gorgeous graphs just for visuals, so you can just kind of see in the graphs. Here is the preliminary budget by expense type. And you will see that the wages is about, wages and benefits is about 69% of our budget. Supplies and contractuals is about 18%. Taxes and contingency is 1.6, insurances and utilities 3.2. Our capital equipment purchases about 8.2. And one thing that I really need to point out to you in this budget is we have no transfers to any capital projects because we just didn't have the funds to do it with. So again, I just think this is a really good visual. It gives you the concept of how much of our budget is wrapped up in payroll and fringe benefit costs. So the next slide, this shows you wages and fringe benefits by service area. So you'll see that public safety is about 63%, transportation 8%, culture and recreation 3%, home and community services 3%, general government supports about 13%, and then our retiree health insurance and our unemployment possible claims is about 10% of the budget. So again, good visual to show you how the mix of our wages and fringe benefits lays out. Next visual, this is, I think, is really cool also. This shows you a 5-year expenditure, 18, 19, 20, 21, and the 22 preliminary by service area. And then it gives you a nice history. And then the next one shows you the annual service area by expenditure year. So it just kind of gives you the visual of where our activities lie in providing services to the community. Okay, so thank you. I just think those were just great graphs.
Can we get those
So-
graphs sent to us?
Absolutely. So this whole thing will be sent to you after the meeting. And as the mayor just said, and as we were just talking about, it's not sustainable to use your fund balance at, $1 million a year to balance your budget. And as the mayor said, over the past 6 years, we haven't had to do that until COVID hit. So we're still going to have a little bit of catch up, as far as our COVID recovery. But Greg would like to talk to you about why we believe this is not sustainable and what we plan to do about it.
Yeah, as you said, and everyone realizes it's just not sustainable to keep everything in reserve every year without coming up with some kind of plan to eventually operate your operating expenses balanced with your revenue. So we want to really focus 2022 working with all the department heads, especially the ones who have identified staffing needs. It's more than just the police and fire that were included in this preliminary budget. We requested additional staffing for the needs that they have. We want to work with them to evaluate the ways we can work more efficiently, the ways we can maximize current revenue sources that perhaps were not maximized in the last year or so. Are there opportunities for additional investments? The council finance committee has been discussing that. We will work with them to look at other opportunities that might be out there. We also want to prioritize capital improvements that we think as a community will enhance the city in ways that will contribute to increased revenues. And by that, I mean, if there is some sort of capital improvement that might spur or contribute to or supplement new development that may be happening, we want to prioritize that as opposed to something much as we maintain what we have. If we can grow our population base or grow the amount of water we're selling or whatever the case may be, that's something that helps out. So there is a way to increase revenues over time through some of our capital improvements. And we also think that parks and recreation, community development, quality of life sort of projects, those things have value, it costs money and not immediate return necessarily in tax revenue or water revenue, that sort of thing. It's building on the strengths of Oneonta, making this a place people want to come to and live and visit. And hopefully that's the sort of thing that can grow. So with that in mind, I mean, looking at reducing expenses, there are things that we can evaluate our equipment fleet. We always have a lot of equipment expenses that are obviously expensive. You look at fire truck, I mean, everyone knows that equipment is one of the most expensive one-time purchases we have to do. And we have a lot of it. So evaluating that, making sure that we're being most efficient in how we're using things, looking at ways to reduce health insurance costs. As you mentioned, continuing increase, looking at shared services. Are there ways we can be more efficient for those, working with surrounding municipalities? And anything else that may come up, we're gonna approach it with an open mindset. There's no bad ideas. We're gonna spend some significant time in there. Because by the time we get to the 2023 budget process, we hopefully will have identified some ways to close that gap and slowly or hopefully quickly reduce our need to depend on fund balance. So that's our hope for next year.
And just to follow up on that, on our next meeting, I will be bringing to you proposals for or information on our ambulance revenues and our ambulance charges, our fare box charges for bus passes and things like that, our fee schedule and different things. And as we've talked about before, slow and steady increases compound as one. And the reason I asked Joe to repeat the graph of the tax levy and how it compounds, and it shows you that even though we're increasing taxes by $200 and some thousand, we're really increasing our cash flow by over $600,000 just in a 3-year period, because it compounds. You collect that every year, and it's the same way with slow and steady increases in our different revenue sources. It makes it more gradual for the user or the public or whoever is the one paying it to absorb it on a more gradual basis, but it also compounds it for us in our revenue sources. So, but we'll be discussing that at another time. How much time do we have left? Okay. The last section of the presentation has to do with ARPA. And as you know, ARPA, the city was awarded a little over $1.4 million of ARPA funds. And there were several regulations that goes along with the use of the ARPA funds. And I provided this to you in August, but again, it's in your packet. This is per the Department of Treasury website of the way we can spend the ARPA funds. And in meeting with staff members and with Greg and myself and Joe and different key people within the city, we came up with some ideas that we would like the council to propose to you. But before we get into that area, I want to talk to you about the ARPA revenue loss calculation. Part of the ARPA award category is that you are allowed to use your ARPA funds up to your revenue loss calculation. I gave you an example of the calculation. It's a little complicated, but the math works out very nicely for us. You basically have to look at your growth going back to 2016, and you come up with your average annual growth percentage, and you're able to use that percentage or 4.1%, whichever is higher. We were at 4% for a 3-year average, so we're able to use the 4.1%. And applying all of the math that the creators calculated, our revenue loss is a little over 1.6 million, which means that the 741,000 or 714,000 that we received this year is all can be all considered revenue loss use, and which frees us up with a lot of flexibility. So, so Greg would like to talk to you about how we would like to propose to spend not only this year's ARPA funds, but also 2022's ARPA funds, if indeed we receive the funds again.
So as you mentioned, the two allotments, one this year, $14,000. Initially, as I sort of touched on a minute ago, we thought it might be a good strategy to try to focus, get some projects done in the parks, for parks and recreation type projects that we haven't been able to get to, and might not be able to get to without this opportunity. We look at this as similar to fund balance. This is not a recurring revenue source. It's something that we think should be spent on one-time type expenses. We want to try to focus those on things that will improve quality of life, either visible, a lot of people benefit from it. We try to really focus on things that allow people to benefit from it, not focus on a specific area that might help a handful or small. So we came back to the parks. We've had this parks master, new one park master since 2013, last updated. There's been a few projects that were able to get done. The dog park most recently have really been well received. A lot of things on this list that many people here have talked about or heard a lot about. We just think it'd be nice to try to take away those. So I've listed some projects. These are not certainly set in stone. We have until, I believe, the end of 2026 to actually spend this money. We don't have to commit it until 2024. So this isn't something that necessarily needs to be committed to as part of this budget process, but we want us to discuss it because some of these, as Jim mentioned, we have no transfers to capital projects. We have no capital projects funded in 2022 within our budget now. So to do any of these parks projects would be great. And then with the second half of the money we're anticipating getting next year, we would have to consider spending that on infrastructure, specifically on River Street watering project that had been discussed 2 or 3 years ago, and pushed off. Otherwise, that project would require bonds, but offsetting out we have the bond while taken care of. In this case, watering has been over 1,000 breaks is divided between the two ends of it. Many water mains and other issues with infrastructure, and this is just one there. This is the highest priorities, big chunk of money. And this will really help us out with it sooner than otherwise. There are some other ideas here. We listed the 1, 2, 3, 4 BCs, the general areas that we can spend ARPA funds. We look at each specific area and narrow down the ones that we think we can implement most efficiently. In 2022, we have budgeted $10,400 for wastewater testing or COVID-19 surveillance. That's something that would be eligible for reimbursement through this funding course. And then we have 18,000 there for testing. That's a potential need. We don't have any minutes of that yet. We might need some additional testing for COVID-19. That's something that can also be eligible. There's some other projects here that are listed under other funding source or not funded, things that get discussed internally. Not been a priority, or in the case of the mill rates pathways, we have an outside agency that's been talking about providing some funding or recent funds for that. The year to implement categories for the parks projects was just the first step at how these might actually be able to be implemented. Of course, staff. Are there any thoughts, feedback on that approach, other ideas, questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to support what Greg is saying. Is when we looked at these projects and we looked at the types of categories that we were able to spend the ARPA funds on, and also with the mayor's guidance in, some goals to think about is that we wanted to try to benefit the largest number of people possible with the ARPA funds. And we thought that outdoor activities would provide safe recreational options for people, especially if the pandemic continues or if a pandemic arises again. And we can also memorialize what we do, and we can actually say this bike trail was paid with ARPA funds. So years to come, when people go to the playground, and if there's no new playground equipment on it, and there's a plaque there that says, these things were paid by ARPA funds, it lets the community know how we invested our funds. And there's many needs that we can use, but we also focused on what we could do with the staff that we have without having to spend additional money on consulting services and or additional outside services to help us administer a program. For example, if we were going to do some type of grant program, that there'd be administrative cost to it. So we were trying to most efficiently spend the funds into the biggest pot possible. So yes.
I guess my question is, this is a really great jumping off point, and I appreciate that you all put that level of thought into it and put it into this document for us to consider. Since we don't have to commit to it during this budget process, and it sounds like we have until 2024, my question is about the process of us continuing to discuss and ultimately putting into place some decisions around the ARPA funding. Like, what is the appropriate forum for that? How do we see that discussion going forward?
I think that's an ongoing basis at the council's discretion. Go ahead, Jim.
I just need to add something to that.
No, go
By
ahead.
the end of the year, I need to send a report in to the federal government to let them know what our plans are. So
That's not carved in stone.
pardon me?
That's not carved in stone.
No, it's not carved in stone, but I do have to give them progress reports.
Gotcha.
And also with these capital projects, it will take time to do bidding. It will take time to, get the specs written. Time goes by very quickly. So having a plan of action in place, in my viewpoint, is, a strong start to make sure that the funds are committed by 2024. And also with the supply, shortage of goods being delivered and things like that. I just want us to all keep that in mind.
So I think that's an excellent point, is that we should have like an actual strategy for how we're going to make decisions around spending these funds, and probably sooner than later. So is that something that we would discuss like at the finance committee? Should we talk about it in our council meetings?
Well, first of all, let me say I completely support the approach that Greg has put together for the use of the ARPA funds. I think investing in parks, outdoor activities, one-time opportunity is something that's very, very important to people in the city. ARPA is supposed to encourage outdoor safe activities, and it's also supposed to be something that just doesn't cover your routine expenses, something that is really impact people's lives with that following COVID. So I think investing in parks is an excellent approach. I support that. I think the first question, I guess, just to hear from the council now is, does anybody have a concern with taking that approach, having first year's ARPA money invest in parks, and just now from the second year of going to infrastructure? And then if there is agreement that that is a good approach, then we'll probably need to ask Greg. We just have a list there that provides something that is more of a rough budget of what each would cost. I'm very, very lucky this time, obviously.
Yeah. There's some
Oh, you've got it.
initial costs.
So,
Rough idea.
so that would be the next step, to be able to look at that and see how much of that fits into that amount that's available, what needs to be cut, what needs to be deleted, and so forth. I'm sorry. go ahead.
That's okay. I think my impression is that that's already sort of been done by the staff, is to allocate specifically where those funds would go and give us a general idea of what those things would cost. I don't disagree necessarily, but I just think that, since it is such a, I don't want to say a sensitive issue, but it's such a, sensitive issue, I think that, we should have like an actual strategy for how we're going to make decisions around spending these funds. And probably sooner than later. So is that something that we would discuss like at the finance committee?
Um,
a special opportunity for our community that the council should have some discussion around it rather than just saying like, yeah, this plan is good, sure. I know for me, I would really like to, I see that nothing has been allocated to serving the hardest hit communities and families, and I think that some needs have been addressed by constituents with regard to, sure, one sec, just childcare and things like that, that I think that, just deserve to be looked at. You know, I think that we deserve to look at all of the categories and say, and prioritize, and, you know, to take this into serious consideration, but to not just, you know, check mark, and I think that's our responsibility. So I guess my question still stands. I would like to have some further discussion on it, and I'm just wondering when is the appropriate time to do that. I mean, obviously not right now.
We can schedule it as part of one of the regular scheduled council meetings.
Okay.
For the discussion around these local things. Give everybody a chance to study the numbers that Greg has put forward. You may add some additional information not to it. And then we can schedule a discussion for the regular council meeting.
Okay, great. I would love that. And Jenny, I wanted to hear what
No,
yours.
that's okay. I just wanted to add that we had preliminary discussions on those different types of programs, but we can talk about that at this meeting in detail.
Okay, sure. And it sounds like that would be something where your consideration of, not just the thing itself, but all the things that it takes to support that, may have eliminated that, but that still may be something that we feel and our constituents feel is important for the community. So I think that it's valuable.
And I would also like to invite Judy to that meeting because she understands when they talk about the community definitions, there are certain definitions we have to meet to be able to actually go in that area.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry.
I'd just like to say that I thank you, Councilmember LaParche, for raising those concerns. Completely agree with you that the council should take an opportunity to say, just kind of rubber stamping them tonight. But just for my clarity, Jenny, didn't we use unrestricted fund balance in 2019 for purchases?
2019 for purchases. Unrestricted fund balance. We might have for one-time items. I'd have to look back to see, but not for reoccurring operating expenses. No. It did not go for any type of salary or fringe benefits or supplies. It was probably an equipment purchase. It could have been, for example, if I remember that correctly, it may have been for the payroll upgrade, you know, a one-time.
The generator.
Maybe the generator, yeah,
One time.
Yeah.
Generator.
yeah, but not for operating itself.
Before we close, I want to thank Jimmy, and Joe, and Greg. Probably nobody knows how many hours of work went into preparing this. I can tell you, I don't know how many, but I know a lot. So I really appreciate the amount of work that went into this for thoughtful. It's not an easy thing to do. I'm just going to add, I'll be a bit of a bridge here, is that I would ask one more thing, and that is if you're going to propose $1.2 million of expenses out of the unrestricted fund, that it comes with more of a plan on how that's not going to be repeated next year and the year after and the year after, than just some vague statements that we're going to try really hard this year to find ways to cut expenses. I think that asking to expend $1.2 million in the current expenses without a more detailed plan of why this is not, how this is not going, we're going to prevent this from being repeatable, is a thoughtful thing to do. So that's what we're doing.
That's it.
With that, we're going to close the budget meeting. Thank you, unless anybody has any final questions or comments.
Can I just say, if anybody has questions, please email me so I can have answers prepared for you for the next budget meeting. And I will also share your questions if you want to copy all the other council members and the mayor too, so everybody knows what your question is, because some of you may have the same question.